Hello, everyone. It's August 25th. It's Tuesday. I'm here in my office in New York City. It's 90 degrees outside, and I'm glad to be inside in the air conditioning. Thank you very much for joining me. Today, I'm going to share with you an interview that I recorded last week for my home in Woodstock with Christine VanZandbergen. Very interesting interview. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. I know I did. But before we are joined by Christine, let's take a look at a couple of the stories that have occurred in our online news today. Here's a story which is interesting. Radiologists seem to make more errors when interpreting CT studies at night. What can I say? I hope that I'm interpreted during the day. But it's an interesting story. All joking aside, please read it. And here is another story about someone. They had to go and fight a court battle in order to build a new hospital in one of Georgia's biggest counties that currently had no hospital. So that's a sort of an interesting story talking about the litigious world that we live in. You're always going to learn something if you subscribe to our online news. We cover interesting topics every day and reprint stories from our magazine. So I encourage you, please sign up. It's free, it's interesting, and you'll be glad that you did. As promised, we have the distinct pleasure of being joined today by Christine VanZandbergen. I'm sure I said that correctly. And Christine is the Vice President of Information Services Applications at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. And she is very knowledgeable in the field of EHR. So Christine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. And it's a real pleasure to be able to share our experiences.
EHR, you have shared with me that most hospitals have selected their EHR system already and installed it, but the big challenge and the ongoing challenge will be engagement. So tell me about that. Why is it a challenge, and how would you suggest the hospital healthcare systems to overcome that challenge?
Sure. So as you commented, I think most organizations really have moved beyond the implementation phase. So selection was, 7 or 8 years ago for large organizations and smaller ones, quite frankly, that hadn't quite gone down the road, moved through implementation, and now really are focused on how do we leverage our systems and drive value. And that value can be measured in a variety of different ways, but specific to the clinical relationship between patients and their care teams. We continue to figure out ways to do that creatively. I think active engagement of our clinicians and our patients in that conversation and how we effectively configure and support systems to do that in a really rapidly changing environment is one challenge that we certainly have. I think to the extent that you're able to identify those key clinical and operational partners that both have an interest but have dedicated and carved out time to partner with technology folks in our organization with our IS team is the way in which we approach it. And what we find is often that our clinicians and patients bring a very different lens than our technology experts, and really that partnership is what we think is our secret sauce.
I see. The term role transformation and care team transformation, can you comment on that?
Sure. So I think what many organizations did by necessity was they had technology that lived in sort of one world and care teams that lived in another. And while I think others, much like us, approached those implementations as partnerships, or at least I'm hopeful that they did, and for us was one of the keys to our implementation success, what didn't occur in that space was how do roles and responsibilities really change when you insert technology more robustly into an environment. And so an example of that might be individuals who now are more accessible by patients, immediately accessible by patients in a way that they weren't 5 or 6 years ago, or in an environment where that direct connection didn't exist. And so when we look at how technology can really support advances in care, I think we need to pause and think about the roles and responsibilities of the individuals participating in that care. In addition to that, there have been, additional roles created over the last 10 to 15 years, or certainly different responsibilities from a clinical perspective that those individuals have been participating in. Pharmacists, I think, are a really good example of that, where 10 or 15 years ago, I think they were less present in conversations with patients about medications and medication adherence and questions about medications. Today, they really embrace and take on that role, and I think the technology needs to support their participation in that.
I see. And you believe that that's something that can be achieved?
I do. I think the tools are there. I think the technology tools are there. I think the desire operationally and clinically to do role transformation is also there. And I think the time is now to really focus on that. And again, make sure that the technology tools support the ongoing changes in care processes.
What sort of technology tools do you think would be leveraged, and how would they be leveraged?
So I think mobile notifications and anything we can do on the go certainly is one of those areas. I think several EHR vendors have spent a fair bit of time in that space. I think the other piece that I would say should have more attention is robust and intelligent filtering. And what I mean by that is there is more data than anybody could ever digest being deposited into the EHRs. I think there are some basic filtering capabilities that exist, but I think they are not as specific as they should be or can be related to certain roles. And again, that role transformation.
Now, EHR in some ways makes the clinician's life easier, and in some ways makes it more difficult. In the future, do you believe that the clinician's life will be easier, or is this just a different sort of paper pushing that's going to happen?
Boy, that's a great question. And as a clinician, I'm both optimistic that it will make our life easier. And from a technology perspective, I see that on the horizon. I would tell you that having done a lot of my clinical work in the paper-based world, that your ability to access data and the speed with which you can do that is just phenomenal in terms of supporting advanced patient care. I think the technology, again, started a bunch of fire hoses or fire hydrants sort of coming at us. And now our challenge is how do we present the right information filtered to the right people so that you don't have to sift through quite as much as you do today. I've seen some good signs of that in the EHR vendors and their approach. And then, quite frankly, third-party vendors that spend some time in that space. So I do think we'll get there.
And EHR vendors are constantly improving their technology or their programs several times a year, I would guess. Is that correct?
They are. And, there's pros and cons to the updates that come, and the ability to take those updates. And, upside is you want to adopt and leverage new technology and improvements as they become available. But the change management and the ability for the front end clinicians and operational individuals in healthcare to really absorb those changes has got to be weighed in that approach.
Yeah, and teaching the staff the new way to do things.
Absolutely. It's not as intuitive as I think, some other sort of, technologies that people use every day. But, somebody made a really good comment when we were discussing this probably a year or two ago, which is just imagine if everything that you had on your mobile phone, you woke up and all of your icons were moved around. And when you opened them, what was in there was the same content, but it wasn't in the same place. And it's something that you had used every day or several times a day for 6 months. and how disruptive and disorienting that could be. And that was the experience of an individual that I spoke with.
Yeah, it's true. You want to get the latest patch, but it irritates you when they change things.
That's right.
Just before we go, we talked about voice recognition and how that might have an impact on the future. Is there anything else, any other technologies that you think might have an impact on the future to make the clinician's life easier and provide patients with a better experience?
Yeah, I think
Those are
understand.
two.
Yeah, so voice recognition, absolutely. I mean, we use our voice every day for a variety of things. I think pretty common is to use it to pull up relevant information in certain settings. I think to the extent that your voice is something, again, that you're quite comfortable with and can be integrated into, I think, EHR technology pretty seamlessly. I think the other piece that I'm hopeful about and interested to see how it progresses and develops is natural language processing and some AI technologies that, they're repeatable words and or images that have certain characteristics that I think in healthcare are very relevant and certainly could decrease the burden that front-end clinicians face and quite frankly, I think identify patterns that our brain just takes too long to identify or just isn't prepared to do. And so I do look forward to seeing how those develop in the healthcare space.
Artificial intelligence is really cutting edge. It's the science fiction future. And anyway, so Christine, this has been a very informative interview, and I'm so grateful to you for joining us. I learned a lot, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much.